We're honoured to welcome our keynote speaker today, independent MLA for East Londonderry, the first and only independent to hold ministerial office and the youngest in the Northern Ireland Executive with departmental responsibility. A graduate of Queen's, she has a BA in politics, an MA in Irish politics, a second master's in political lobbying and public affairs from Ulster University. She's an alumnus of the Washington, Ireland program, working with the US government in the Department of Health and Human Services in 2010. She was managing the program by 2012. In 2014, she was appointed MLA for East Londonderry following the death of David McClarty, to whom she was parliamentary assistant for 6 years. Oh, and she was on Coleraine Borough Council for 2 years as well. And she's only 29. Where did the rest of us go wrong? On her ministerial priority list are 5 items, and the leading one is tackling domestic violence. Ladies and gentlemen, will you please welcome our Minister of Justice, Claire Sugden.
Thank you, Anita. I really am very pleased to be here today in the Guildhall in Derry to celebrate 40 years of Foyle Women's Aid. Thanks to Marie for inviting me. I want to wish a warm welcome to all guests, speakers, and in particular the many volunteers who work tirelessly to support women and children affected by domestic and sexual violence across the North West and Northern Ireland. Foyle Women's Aid opened its doors in 1976. And since that time has become a centre of excellence at the forefront of delivery of key frontline supports and services for women, children and young people. This is clearly evidenced by the interactive timeline which charts the history of Foyle Women's Aid that you see here today. And I would like to recognise the unwavering dedication and commitment of Foyle Women's Aid and to thank you for your unceasing efforts to eliminate domestic and sexual violence in our society. Women's Aid's work from the premise that with support, women can survive domestic violence, and with that support, children can survive domestic violence and move on to a more positive future. Without a doubt, the work of Foyle Women's Aid underpinned, and I quote, an ethos of self-help and mutual support for women, with women, by women, has for the last 40 years been making a positive difference to the lives of many women and children. Domestic violence is very complex and often misunderstood. It affects the lives of 1 in 4 women in Northern Ireland and often goes hand in hand with a range of other issues, including substance and alcohol misuse, specific mental health needs and offending behaviour, and sadly, some result in the loss of life. It cannot be addressed in isolation, and that is why I have made addressing domestic and sexual violence in partnership with my colleagues in the Department of Health one of my key ministerial priorities for the next 5 years. My other priorities are mental health, children and young people, older people, and equality with women within the justice system. And these are all interlinked, very deliberately so, because at the outset I said domestic violence as a priority for the next 5 years will not be just about addressing that in itself. It will be addressing it with the purpose of trying to fix our wider societal problems. And I do believe a lot of it starts with domestic violence and abuse. It is heartening to see that attendees today reflect the diverse areas of influence, including social services, social housing, prevention and justice. I do not need to tell anyone in this room about the devastating impact that domestic violence can have on a woman and her immediate family. But I would actually like to share the story of William. William lived in quite a nice part of town. His friends called him posh. William, people thought he was very lucky because he seemed to get a lot of things, a lot of nice things. William's father was a GP. Everybody thought he was lovely, he was warm, he was kind. William didn't have that experience of his father. His father was always quite angry, upset, tense. William's father often hit William's mother. And William's mother said, "William, don't worry about it. Your daddy's stressed. He can't cope. He didn't mean it." But on the outside, William just thought that wasn't right. Because often his mother cried. William's father cried. William grew up. He was very, very bright at school, but he couldn't quite concentrate on school. He wasn't quite sure why. He was always quite interested in girls, you know, their short skirts, how they flicked their hair. William was really interested in girls. And William, one night, I suppose, tried to force a girl too far. And he didn't think he was doing anything wrong. But the police arrived at his door, and eventually William was convicted, and he was sent to prison. And that led to William's downward spiral. He eventually came out of prison. He did find a job, he found a life, he met a girl. But then his stresses of his new job, it just got to him a bit much, and he didn't have anyone to talk to. He was quite depressed. And he went home, and he hit his wife. And he felt very bad about it. He grew up knowing that what his father was doing is wrong. But he did the same to his wife. And this happened repeatedly. Similar sort of situation, round in circles. William one night caught a glimpse of his son watching him hit his son, or hit his wife. And that makes me think, is William's son going to end up in the same spiraling circle? And that's why I wanted to tell that story, because I believe that domestic violence should not be in isolation when we're trying to tackle our problems. I suppose that the example that I gave you demonstrates that a number of causes, or there are a number of factors which leads people to commit domestic violence. That may be mental health, it may be the stresses of work. Domestic violence doesn't discriminate. In fact, it does discriminate. It discriminates against women, because most victims do tend to be women. Which makes me actually quite angry that we haven't really gone any way into trying to address it before now. I actually think Northern Ireland needs to be ashamed of the fact that we haven't gone any way in addressing this before now. And the wonderful work of Women Aids in the Foyle area, and indeed across Northern Ireland, can only go so far, which is why I have committed that domestic violence will be one of my priorities in the next 5 years. The Stopping Domestic and Sexual Violence and Abuse strategy recognises that domestic and sexual violence and abuse can affect anyone. The story I told you wasn't about a single mother, whose boyfriend was on drugs. And yes, that happens too, but it was in a middle-class area. People who commit domestic violence are doctors, politicians, people within our society, people who we think are upstanding people, because they hide it so well. And we need to start realising that this is endemic right throughout our society. Responses to the public consultation on the strategy highlighted that many families who engage with support agencies have a range of adversities and issues. And these do include domestic abuse, sexual abuse, substance abuse, and poor mental health. And poor mental health is another one of my priorities, because mental health is not just schizophrenia, it's depression, it's stress. And we need to look at that, because the outworkings of mental health have wide-reaching consequences for all of our society, including domestic violence. We have a 7-year strategy which 20 priorities will be addressed. Progressing the priorities through a number of action plans and in partnership with the statutory, voluntary and community sector will make a difference and contribute to improved society. And I suppose one of my observations since becoming minister is that we do need to include our communities. Too often politicians at Stormont do get accused of doing very little, and that they've made a mess, let's just go back to direct rule, I've heard. But actually I believe the general public need to take some responsibility. Communities need to take responsibility, because politicians can't do this alone. We can set policy, we can set legislation, but that implementation begins at home. It begins in communities, and it begins right throughout Northern Ireland. So I would certainly encourage you to play your part taking away from this conference today. My department is taking forward actions aimed at breaking the cycle of violence and abuse, recognising that when abuse does happen, victims need to be supported and protected, and that perpetrators are brought to justice. The introduction of a domestic abuse offence and domestic violence disclosure scheme in Northern Ireland is something we're considering. The development of a phased implementation of domestic violence protection notice and orders. Consideration of the most appropriate model for domestic homicide reviews in Northern Ireland. Enhancements to the domestic violence court listing arrangements in Derry, Londonderry to include improvement to support services, development of a pilot judicial supervised perpetrator programme. Today you will hear from Judge McElhone, and I would like to commend him for his drive in developing the special listing system, which has been the benefit of victims of domestic violence here, so thank you, Judge. I recognise again that there are many dedicated statutory and voluntary organisations who work continuously to assist and support victims of domestic violence. And as I have said, today in particular, I want to commend those from Foyle Women's Aid, who have worked tirelessly over the years to provide crucial support and protection services to victims. Your dedication and enthusiasm in tackling violence against women and children is truly exemplary. Women's Aid play a key role in partnership working, such as multi-agent risk assessment conferences known as MARICs. 16% of referrals to MARIC have come from Women's Aid. Since 2010, safety plans have been put in place for over 10,000 women, involving over 13,000 children. Ashleywood is a prime example where Foyle Women's Aid has been visionary and has created an environment where victims are safe, comfortable, respected and valued. Innovative work being taken forward by Foyle Women's Aid, such as the intention to create a family justice centre where victims will have access to all required services and statutory authorities in one safe place. 40 years is a long time, and in many ways it would have been wonderful if we didn't have to stand here today and celebrate this milestone. However, unfortunately, we are all too aware that such violence and abuse does happen, and it is essential, therefore, that victims are fully supported and protected through services provided by organisations such as Foyle Women's Aid. Once again, I will commend and congratulate Foyle Women's Aid, and I know that this event is looking to the future as well as reflecting on the past, and I am hopeful that we can continue to work together to address this vitally important issue. I wish you well with your discussions, and unfortunately I can't remain to the end, but I would be very interested in hearing the learning from today. Thank you very much.